Let's talk about muscles. When you think of muscles, do you think of these? Or maybe this? Perhaps you have a mental image that looks something like this. While all of those are accurate representations of skeletal muscle, it is important to understand the different types of muscle that are present in the body and their specific structures and roles. Muscle makes up between 40 and 50% of our body mass, so there is a lot of it. It is high in protein and uses lots of energy, which is why pumping iron at the gym can increase your metabolism. Basically, muscle tissue is the movement tissue of the body. Whether you want to lift your leg in order to start running, throw a right hook, pump blood around the body, or move food through the digestive tract, muscle tissue is involved. Wherever movement occurs, no matter how big or how small, you can be sure that muscle cells were responsible. There are three different types of muscle in the body, which can be divided into smooth and striated muscle. If you had the opportunity to look at striated muscle cells in the microscope lab, you will have seen lots of tiny lines which run across the muscle cells, hence the name, striated meaning striped. Smooth muscle does not have these stripes. Striated muscle can be further divided into skeletal and cardiac muscle. In anatomy, you will begin to notice that there are clues held within the names. You might have noticed that when talking about the bones, the words usually started with osteo. Likewise, when you see the prefix myo, then we are talking about muscle. Smooth muscle lines our hollow organs, including the entire length of our digestive system, the bronchioles, bladder, uterus in those that have one, and the many thousands of miles of blood vessels. It is under involuntary control or the autonomic nervous system, think automatic, and also responds to signals from the endocrine system, which means you don't have to think about constricting your blood vessels in order to increase blood pressure when you stand up too quickly. Smooth muscle cells are spindle-shaped and have a single nucleus. They can either exist in isolation or as a network of multiple cells that can talk to each other. Smooth muscle contracts or relaxes in order to change the volume of an organ, such as contracting to force urine from the bladder or moving food through the digestive tract via a peristaltic wave. This is like a muscular Mexican wave. When this happens in reverse, food is pushed back up and results in vomiting. Smooth muscle has many very important functions of which we are normally blissfully unaware. Cardiac muscle is striated, but like smooth muscle is controlled by the autonomic nervous system and endocrine system. Important because we probably wouldn't get much work done if we had to constantly think about making our heart beat. Cardiac muscle, or myocardium, is only found in the heart. Gives you some idea of just how specialized this particular tissue has become. Cardiac muscle cells are mononucleated, only one nucleus, and are branched, looking a bit like that foam stuff they put around your alcohol bottles in duty free. The branched cells connect and talk to each other via gap junctions, which allows cells to pass on electrical signals to contract. Coupled with a highly structured network of non-contractile conducting muscle cells, results in perfectly timed contractions which enables the heart to pump so effectively. And luckily for us, smooth muscle and cardiac muscle doesn't get tired like the muscles of our arms and legs. By far the largest mass of muscle tissue belongs to our skeletal muscle, and along with tendons and ligaments make up the muscular system. Like cardiac muscle, it is striated with many lines visible in the light microscope. However, unlike smooth and cardiac muscle, skeletal muscle is under voluntary control or the somatic nervous system. So at some level, when we want to lift our leg to kick a ball, we have to think about it. The most common use of skeletal muscle is pulling on our bones to create movement of segments around joints. However, skeletal muscle is also important for maintaining posture and generating heat via shivering. Skeletal muscle fibers are formed by the fusing of lots of cells, resulting in a long, multinucleated structure enclosed by the sarcolemma, a specialized cell wall. Sarco is another prefix which is specific to muscles, as you will see when looking at the mechanics of muscle contraction. Each muscle fiber is covered in a fine connective tissue called the endomysium. Many muscle fibers are bundled together within a fibrous connective tissue layer called the perimysium, producing muscle fascicles. Many fascicles are bundled together to give a single muscle covered in a dense fibrous connective tissue, the epimysium. This dense connective tissue extends beyond the end of the muscle to form the rope-like tendon, which is a super tough, collagen-rich structure which connects the muscles to the bones and extends across joints. Because muscle tissue is so energy hungry, the cells are packed full of that all-important energy-producing organelle, the muscle also requires a steady supply of oxygen and glucose, so it has its own oxygen transport molecule, myoglobin, which is related to hemoglobin and contributes to its red color, and its own stores of glucose polymers in the form of muscle glycogen. If you deplete your supply of glycogen, then your body has to rely on fats and protein to produce energy, which is the scientific basis behind the high-fat, low-carb diets you might have heard about recently. Glucose stored as muscle glycogen can only be used for energy by that specific muscle, whereas liver glycogen can be released as glucose into the blood to fuel any cells in the body. While each type of muscle cell has different shapes, arrangements, and functions, the basic unit of movement, the motor unit, is largely the same in skeletal and smooth muscle. Each motor unit has a motor neuron which interacts with a group of muscle cells. The interaction between the neuron and the muscle is known as the neuromuscular junction. In skeletal muscle, this junction is in the form of an axon interacting with a group of muscle fibers, while in smooth muscle, the autonomic neuron has varicosities which release the neurotransmitters onto the muscle cells. Electrical signals are propagated along the motor neuron, resulting in release of neurotransmitters into the neuromuscular junction. This release of neurotransmitters signals the muscle cell to contract or get shorter. The specific sequence and number of electrical messages sent along various motor neurons results in coordinated contraction of the muscle tissue and specific movement results. Contraction of the muscle cell or fiber is caused by the interaction of the two contractile proteins, actin and myosin. While all three muscle types contain these proteins, they come in different forms known as isoforms. We will focus on the skeletal and cardiac muscle contractile apparatus. However, feel free to investigate smooth muscle contraction in your own time. Skeletal muscle fibers contain bundles of long protein myofibrils which are surrounded by a specialized endoplasmic reticulum, the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Arrival of an action potential at the neuromuscular junction causes an electrical signal to be initiated and transmitted through the muscle fiber via the sarcoplasmic reticulum, resulting in the release of calcium into the cytosol. This high calcium concentration inside the cell, in a rather complicated series of events, stimulates the muscle cells to contract. The striation of skeletal and cardiac muscle cells are the result of the rigid arrangement of proteins actin and myosin, which make up the myofibrils. Thin filaments of actin are interleaved by thick filaments of myosin in a structure known as the sarcomere. Increased calcium concentration activates the sarcomere, allowing myosin to bind to actin. Combining ATP with the heads of the myosin filaments and the breaking of the high-energy phosphate bond results in the myosin heads walking along the actin filaments. When myosin walks along actin in both directions, the ends of the sarcomere get pulled together, and the sarcomere gets shorter. It's a bit like tug of war, but instead of the people pulling the rope pulls the people closer together. When hundreds of sarcomere in a row get shorter simultaneously, the entire muscle fiber gets shorter, or contraction occurs. Release of all the myosin heads allows the sarcomeres to return to their resting length, or muscle relaxation can occur. This is known as the sliding filament theory of muscle contraction. Shortening of the muscle produces a pulling action on the bone it connects to, causing the bone to move up towards the muscle. Note, muscles can only pull, they cannot push. For a simple flexion extension movement like elbow flexion, the muscles exist as pairs. The muscle that is contracting or pulling on the bone, in this case the biceps brachii, is known as the agonist, and the muscle that works against this movement, triceps brachii, is known as the antagonist. For movement to occur, the antagonist must relax when the agonist contracts. Muscles which assist the agonist or prime mover are known as synergists. Muscles attach to the skeleton in two main locations. The attachment located proximal to the joint is known as the origin and is fixed. The attachment point distal to the joint is known as the insertion and moves with the joint. There are some exceptions to this rule which you may learn about later. These landmarks are important for the osteo students to get familiar with, and medical imaging students will need to know the names of the bony landmarks that are associated with these attachment points. The tough, flexible tendons extend across joints, allowing muscles to act as pulleys, working on the levers or bones of the skeleton.